these colleagues from University of Washington. I'll let him introduce them. We felt very strongly that it was important for the board to get this information and to know it's coming. We believe that the study that they have worked on probably will be introduced in other areas, and I just wanted to make sure that the board was cognizant of the work that was going on and what they've done, the things they found, and also to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing to address it.
So before we start, I'd like to say thank you for being here. I know it's a long ride up from Seattle or down from Seattle. We do let Seattleites into Tacoma occasionally. But I also had the opportunity.
We just don't let you stay.
Yeah. Remember, you just go north right after this meeting.
You just
But I had the opportunity to read this article, and thanks to Pat. And I really got a lot of information out of it. Pat and I had further discussions on it. And so I really do appreciate you all being here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So have at it.
I'm going to make a short introduction of my friend Charles Hirschman, who is worked with my colleague Joe Wilhoff in setting this up, this study, putting it in force. And it is a combination of both an academic study, but the reason they're here is that there are great applications, practical applications of the dropout issue for Tacoma. So, Charlie, you want to introduce your group?
Sure, I'll do it. And how do I move the slide forward?
Just move it this way. Just push the arrow this way.
So, where
Okay,
did you find
let me introduce who is here this evening. I'm Charles Hirschman. I'm a professor of sociology at the University of Washington. To my immediate left is Jerry Herding. He is not only a professor of sociology, he's the chair of my department, so be nice to him.
No, you have to be nice to him.
Nick Farah, who's on the left, was a graduate student. He got his PhD about 18 months ago, and we'll be losing him this fall. He's going to Washington, D.C., who I understand they need help there. We also have a couple of other members of our team. Delina Patton's right there on the right. She is actually, she's working on her doctorate right now, but she's a graduate of Stadium High School.
Hey, good for you.
Next to her is
yeah. You can stay for a little while longer.
And Elisa Vuong, who's not from Tacoma or Seattle. She's originally from Olympia. She's a junior at UW, but one of these days we'll have her as a PhD as well. One of the three of us are going to talk for 5 minutes. I'm going to lead off and talk about the results of our dropout study. It's actually a graduation study, but the opposite of graduation is a dropout. Nick is then going to talk about how to predict this, not in high school, but in 8th grade. And then Jerry's going to talk a little bit about the 9th grade experience. Okay. So Beyond High School project. Actually, our project began a dozen years ago having nothing to do with high school graduation or dropouts. We were interested in the transition from high school to college. So we interviewed all the seniors in all 5 Tacoma high schools in 5 years, in 2000 through 2005. We expanded. We also did Clover Park and Mukilteo, and we've been following them ever since, but that's not why you have me here this evening. You really want to know about high school attrition. This is a subject that we did. And as Pat mentioned, Joe Wilhoff said after a couple of years of the study, we're helping you. Why don't you help us? Your problem is the transition to college. The problem here was keeping them in high school. So they basically turned over the Tacoma public school database for 10 years, and we essentially assembled the data in cohorts to be able to track students from the 9th grade forward. After we learned what was going on, we did a survey of incoming 9th graders to find out what was going on there, and then we went back and did a survey of 8th grade teachers. You'll hear about that in a moment. This is a very simple graph. This is just the enrollment in 8th grade through 12th grade in the Tacoma public schools. Now, this doesn't tell you what's happening now. This is the average from 1997-98 to 2004 and 5. And you don't need an advanced degree in statistics to know that the number of seniors are about half of those of 9th graders. Now, 9th graders is an unfair comparison because Tacoma attracts a lot of students who are going to middle school and private schools, and they transfer into public schools for 9th grade. There's also a lot of attrition. A lot of 9th grade students get retained. So that 9th year is a little bit higher than it should be. But you can see, even if we begin with 8th grade, the stair-step fashion goes right down. Now, we tracked them a little bit more closely, and so we followed students, individual students, year by year. And again, this is the average over a decade. It's about 5 cohorts that we followed through. So we begin in the the fall of the freshman year, and by spring, 77% of the students are already missing. No summer involved, just during that year. If we pick them up in the spring of their sophomore year, only 2/3 of those students, 67%, are on track. In other words, they're classified as sophomores. The 14% have been retained, the others have disappeared. By the junior year, you're a little over a half. By the spring of the senior year, it's down to 49% who are on track, another 10% who have been retained. And then we look at graduation in 6 years. 46% of the students graduate on time from the Tacoma Public Schools. Another 5% will graduate delayed. Another 6% we can't figure out. They have enough credits to graduate, but for some reason in the database they're not there. So it looks like about 57% of 9th graders graduate, who begin the Tacoma Public Schools, graduate 6 years later. However, we have a problem because we did this study before they had the universal ID tracker to find out where they were going. So there are students who transfers within Tacoma we follow, but the ones who transfer outside of Tacoma we weren't able to follow during this period of time. And based upon a whole series of other studies I'll just mention, we think that the true graduation rate is probably closer to 65 to 70%, which is sort of comparable to the national pattern. Who are the students who are dropping out? Well, first of all, boys. Boys are less likely to graduate than 40% less likely to graduate than females, and it's because they get lower grades, they're more likely to be retained. For boys who get grades comparable to girls and are not retained, they graduate at the same level. Retention is the single most important predictor of dropping out. Okay, my screen just went dead here. Okay.
Here it is.
Okay.
Charlie.
Okay. Thank you. If you were retained in elementary or middle school, you're 15% less likely to graduate. If you come from a low-income family identified as reduced lunch programs, or live in a low-income neighborhood, you're 25 to 35% less likely to graduate. And then also minority students are less likely to graduate as well, primarily because they're disproportionately coming from the low-income community. Now, we sort of knew this before we began, but we found something new. And we're calling it, to try to call attention to it, we're calling it the 9th grade shock. Essentially, this is a shock that happens in the 9th grade that's unpredicted by 8th grade grades. In the 8th grade, about a little less than a quarter of the students are failing. They have a GPA below 2.0. In 9th grade, it's almost 40%. So there are a lot of students who aren't failing in 8th grade, but they do fail in the 9th grade, a lot of them. The students who are failing in 8th grade are almost certain to fail in the 9th grade, 80% of them, and it doesn't require any research by us or anybody else to be able to predict that. But students who are doing relatively well in the 8th grade also stumble in the 9th grade. Half of students who are getting a GPA between a 2 and a 3 are going to get a GPA below 2 in 9th grade. 10% of students who have a GPA above 3 are going to have a GPA below 3. This is the first semester of the 9th grade. It isn't, at the end of the year. It's almost happens immediately. This 9th grade shock, we put everything into our multivariate statistical models, and this was the major predictor of not graduating from high school, is this drop between the 8th grade and 9th grade. It is correlated with all the other things that we look at, but it's ubiquitous. In other words, it doesn't just affect low-income students, minority students, students have been retained as well. This effect of this dropping in grades, it happens to lots of students, and my conclusion is that the 9th graders are not ready for high school. Why? Well, I'll turn to my colleagues.
Would you mind if we ask a few questions in
sure.
case
Each one of us are on a 5-minute limit here.
Okay.
So each one of them are going to present for 5 minutes, but I'll be happy to answer about mine. But we're going to hear, he's going to talk about predicting with our 8th grade teachers, and then Jerry's going to talk about the 9th grade experience.
We want to make sure you don't rush. We want to make sure that you have plenty of time to
we
share.
came all the way from Seattle. We're here the whole evening.
Yeah, okay.
Until you kick us out.
There's not much left.
Whether we want you or not.
Yeah. Just real quick, anything that just popped out real quick?
Popped out to me, and I'm a product of Tacoma Public Schools, and when I went to high school, the dropout rate was less. Demographics obviously were different, but we had 3-year high school. we had 10, 11, and 12. And I'm wondering if there's been comparisons between the four-year high school, the age differential, for example, of maturity between 14 and 15 going to high school. And, you know, if you don't want to answer that later, you can, but if there is, because I've been struck by that for quite a while, watching my own children go through school.
The research shows that every transition is a risky period.
Right.
When they transition from elementary to junior high school, when they're going to transition from middle school to high school, it's going to be a shock. It may be less. I don't know what the difference would be at 10th grade versus 9th grade. But you will have a problem because expectations have changed, and a lot of students are not going to be ready for that change in expectations.
I guess I was just, you know, looking at the maturation differences, and I have three sons of three different races, but watching the maturity level of them at 14 versus 15, and I'm just wondering if that is a factor that could contribute, exacerbate that shock a little bit more than perhaps just going to high school with all the different changes in social interactions. I don't know if anybody in the sociology has looked at that or like that.
I don't know. I have two children. One was ready when she was 10 to go to college.
And you said she.
And the other child, he, was probably ready for high school about age 20.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of individual variation, and some of it is year by year, and some of us take much longer than others to get ready for whatever is going to be thrown at us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that transition, whether it occurs 8 to 9 or 9 to 10, is still a choice point,
Right.
and a difference that is readily seen. But I can't say the magnitude of whether one's better than the other, but it's consistent that moving from 9 to 10 is a difficult.
The only reason I really asked that question, there's been debate in this community for a number of years when we went to the middle school configuration back in the mid-'80s, and that's about the time, you know, academic achievement and so on started to fall, whether that was a reason, you know, kids, different I guess, organization of ages and maturity levels and so on. So I just was curious if there was any research on that.
There are a few studies, but the results are a bit unclear because they are controlling for things such as preparedness and engagement. Right. So that kind of muddles the comparison group, and so it's unclear. And there's
okay, well, thank you. I've kind of wondered that if there was any research. Appreciate it.
So what this section of our talk discusses is predicting potential dropouts. And one of the key points that Charles made is that in the transition from 8th to 9th grade, it's difficult for many students. Further, this transition is highly associated with dropping out, which makes it a natural intervention point. However, one of the difficulties with interventions, obviously, is correctly identifying students who are at risk of dropping out. I think one of the points that Charlie made was that we know that 8th and 9th grade grades are related, and they're highly predictive of 8th grade grades are highly predictive of 9th grade grades, and that's highly predictive of dropping out. However, again, as they don't perfectly overlap, we can't just use 8th grade grades to predict this 9th grade performance or low academic performance. Otherwise, we're going to miss a lot of students, particularly those students experiencing this 9th grade shock. So what we're going to do in this section of the talk is kind of think about whether or not 8th grade teachers may be able to help us pre-identify students who are potentially at risk of dropping out of high school. So the data we use come from what we call the High School Success Survey, and it was a survey of all middle school 8th grade teachers, and this is an example of the survey with student name there instead of obviously the student names, of the 8th grade teachers, and asked them about all their 8th grade students, and essentially they could answer very likely to unlikely in regards to 3 questions. Is a student likely to have academic problems next year, behavioral problems next year? Are they likely to leave school before graduation? And we did a series of statistical analyses, and essentially all 3 of these indicators are highly correlated, so they're a good measure, and they're pretty highly correlated with 8th and 9th grade GPA. So if you like later, we can talk about some of the statistical aspects, but in short, it's a pretty good measure. So the question then becomes, let's kind of think about these teacher evaluations and how they line up with 8th grade grades. And the two bars on the left jump out, and we see that, not too surprisingly, teachers are rating students who do poorly in 8th grade as being likely to have problems in 9th grade. And let me note what our rating is. Instead of, for time's sake, we combined all the ratings, and this just indicates if at least one of their teachers rated them as being likely or very likely to experience academic or behavioral problems or likelihood of dropping out of high school. So this is kind of any indicator of risk. And again, we see that in 8th grade, the teachers are pretty good at identifying low achieving students. What's interesting, at least to us, is that you think about the students above a 2.0 and the 2.0 to 3.0 range, and even above that, teachers are still identifying some of those students as potentially being at risk to experience problems, because those aren't students that we normally think about. This is further compounded when we think about where the population of 8th graders are on the distribution of GPA. And what we see is that only 17% of students are on that low performing end. We see that, the two bars on the left in red, those 17% are the students that teachers are identifying pretty well. However, the other 87% we may not think about as being at risk because their GPA is relatively high, but teachers are still picking a lot of them up as potentially being at risk of experiencing problems in 9th grade and beyond. So the question then obviously becomes, and I think this slide is hinting at that, is can these teacher ratings help? Can they help us better predict this kind of disconnect between 8th and 9th grade? Can they help us better predict who's going to experience the 9th grade shock? And so that's what we're going to attempt to do on this slide. So what this shows here is a cross-tabulation of 8th grade GPA and 9th grade GPA. 8th grade GPA are the rows, 9th grade GPA are the columns, and 8th grade GPA in the 1 unit category, so below 1.0, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. In 9th grade, we essentially use a cutoff of above 2.0 and below 2.0. We're kind of considering low 2.0 to be low academic performance. We did this with a variety of different cut points, a variety of different ways, and the story's the same. It's just to what extent we want to break down the data. I thought this would be simplest, or at least most easy to convey. And what we see is the students in the bottom right-hand side in red. Those are the kids who in 8th grade did poorly, and in 9th grade they do poorly again. So we're seeing GPA is accurately predicting, 8th grade GPA is accurately predicting 9th grade GPA. The students in yellow are a bit more problematic because these are kids who did well. They have a GPA between 2.0, 3.0, 3.0, 4.0. In 8th grade, and when they get to 9th grade, their GPA is below 2.0. And what we see is that this isn't a trivial fraction of the population. This is about 25% of all students. So if we were just going to use 8th grade grades to predict 9th grade success, we'd miss 25%. We wouldn't identify them as being at risk. So the question then is, can these teacher ratings help? So what we did is, again, we took the same idea of any teacher in 8th grade reporting them as being likely or very likely to experience a problem or potentially being a dropout. And what we see is for the top row we'll take first is there were 112 students, the box in yellow on top, that had a GPA in 8th grade of between 3 and 4. 9th grade they had a GPA of below 2.0. And the teacher ratings, if we use those to kind of augment a measure, teachers are able to identify 59 of them, or 53%. Then in the next group of 2.0 to essentially 3.0, there are 352 students, and the teacher ratings allow us to pick up 303 of them, or 86%. So clearly we're seeing that these teacher ratings are helping pick up something beyond grades in terms of evaluating students. Then obviously the bottom two groups, we see that teachers do a good job of predicting the students who did poorly in 8th grade, and again poorly in 9th grade. So coming back to this notion of can the teacher ratings or can a kind of a teacher evaluation help in predicting or pre-identifying high school dropout, I would say yeah, I think that they do quite a good job of enhancing our ability to predict low performance in 9th grade, which is important given this association between 9th grade and later academic disengagement and dropout. And what was pretty remarkable is that 78% of the students who were not identified as at risk, these were the students in the yellow box, then we didn't identify them when we just used GPA. We were able to identify them when we also used our teacher ratings. So I thought this was quite a helpful tool.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
So again, as a feature of our work with Joe Wilhoff and Robin Munson, we were confronted with some of this empirical information that suggested that there was this level of increased failure in 9th grade during this transition part, where, as the slide indicates, a quarter of the 9th grade class was at a GPA below 1.0. We also know that 9th grade failure is predictive of later dropout in general. And then what we were also seeing is that the 8th grade performance was not fully predictive of what was occurring in the 9th grade GPA. So as part of our work with Joe was we developed this survey of the 8th grade teachers, but we also wanted to see what the 9th grade experience was for these students and connect them up to whether we could connect certain features of their experience to later failure or success, however you wish to discuss it. And what we did was create a ninth grade survey of students, which was attempt to capture all your ninth graders in the 5 comprehensive schools, and we had about a 71% coverage. We were then able to link their response. It was about a 4-page little questionnaire covering both their experiences that they currently were experiencing in ninth grade and also some reflective experiences back to 8th grade. And then this was all done before any of them had received any feedback in the terms of GPA for their first semester of ninth grade. So they really didn't know. I mean, they had feedback in the sense of grades on papers, et cetera, but they didn't know anything about their GPA at this point in time in ninth grade. What we were thinking in general, and what this slide shows, is that as a framework, we anticipate that family and other past risk factors, as well as their 8th grade performance, would influence the process, but you as a school district or as a school can't manipulate those things. But what we were interested in is the bigger box about their initial high school experiences, which are malleable, if you will, their preparedness, their academic orientation, their achievement orientation, if you will, and their level of engagement in school or attachment to school. And so we were interested in trying to capture some of those factors, thinking that in some ways you can't change whether their SES is from a low-income family, but you can alter their level of engagement in their ninth grade experience through some form of intervention. And then we wanted to connect these up to their ninth grade performance. So in doing so, what we saw is, and this was consistent through the 3 different measures that we had there: preparation, academic orientation, and engagement. What we could see is if we broke people up just simply in high and low at the median, for those that are low on engagement, you can see that the average grade point was about 2. And if you were above the median on engagement, the GPA average there was nearly 3. So almost a full grade difference between the just by knowing this engagement. And this held both for engagement, preparation, and academic achievement. And then what we did as well is with some statistical manipulation, what we tried to do is basically make individuals the same on their SES background, controlling for where they came from, controlling for where their 8th grade experience was, that you could also see that above and beyond those factors, that this engagement, preparation, and academic orientation had predictive effects, if you will, on their ninth grade structure. Or another way of thinking of it is, even if you could, once you've controlled for their background, if you will, you could actually manipulate preparedness and get an increase in achievement if you raise preparation above and beyond their background, that you could increase their ninth grade achievement. Or if you increase their engagement, you would increase their achievement, and likewise orientation. And that those have independent effects net of where they're coming from, if you will. So in that sense, what we would conclude is that there's a place there to manipulate or intervene that's possible, that would net you some impact, if you will, on their later ninth grade performance. And for sure, during this whole process, we also statistically can see that the 8th grade, another place that you could intervene in, is that their 8th grade achievement continues to have effects even after you've dealt with their family background and after you've dealt with this notion of their preparation and engagement and orientation. I think that's it.
Next slide.
And that's us.
We're findable.
I have a question on the engagement. How did you statistically measure that, and how did you define it?
We measure it in a few different ways, but this was sort of an index that captured whether they were involved in school activities.
How many variables? I'm Pat knows I like numbers and statistics. I've got a background in that. How many variables did you use, and
in this particular case, there were 5 to create the index. And they were held together fairly well from
activities, sports, clubs.
And so, if you will,
that's what I would have assumed. But And then how did you have a measure for how much they participated, or did you just measure if they did?
It was a level, sort of a Likert scale of
Yeah, right.
high to low, of no participation to
Okay.
a lot of a participation.
I think for some of them too, for example, for the activities, it's still early in the 9th grade year, so some
Right.
of the sporting events may not have started up. So I think we had actual activities and plans to get involved.
Right,
with
so
another
you
question.
measured intent and also actual engagement.
And we had
Eighth grade
8th grade we also had 8th
I'm
grade
sorry?
activities.
8th grade, what they had
Eighth
done
grade
prior.
participation and their plans for participation in the 9th grade. I mean, students
Okay.
who are engaged in school do well academically too.
Great.
That's the lesson. I mean, students who aren't involved aren't going to do well academically.
Okay, thank you. This is very, very helpful. And back in 1996, I was the executive director at Central Latino here in Tacoma. And we had an alternative high school, and I talked to Joe a lot about when this project started, because we had a lot of those kids who wound up, finishing up their high school with us if we were able to, a lot of them quit, as we well know, at that 9th grade level, and they were primarily kids of poverty. It's great to see this information now coming out, and I think it'd be very helpful to us in planning. So what I see from this telling us that we need to be paying a lot more attention to what's going on at the 8th grade level, and we, the one thing that is, I think, probably is the most difficult thing, and that is to deal with those things outside of school. When there are teachers, and I've worked in the elementary schools here after I got done playing in other things, and you can begin to see some of those indicators for some of the kids, even though they are good students. There are a lot of outside forces that begin to come to play on them. So thank you. This is an amazing piece of work. I really appreciate it, Pat. Thank you.
Just real quickly, Pat, are you going to make the article available to all the board members?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
Scott?
Well, thank you for your time. And my question is to the superintendent. What are we doing with this information?
Well, we've just gotten the report, but I know that Jay and I have talked briefly about, getting it to the high school principals. I mean, I think it makes sense that we survey those 8th grade teachers so that we can start to identify those kids that are at risk, that we look at those grade point averages. Preston Barr at middle school has been working with the middle school principals to also really beef up the efforts at 8th grade just to get kids to care more about their grade point average. I don't know if you measured that effect at all, but I know that we have a lot of 8th graders in Tacoma because there isn't a real there's not a promotion policy, that a lot of them really don't care what their grade point average is in 8th grade, and so that effect may still be in some of the research that you've done. So we plan to follow up, and a lot of our high school, I'd say all of our high school principals have really been involved in that 9th grade milestone, making sure that students get enough credits in 9th grade to go on to 10th grade. So some of the things that are doing, the academic orientation and looking at preparedness, I believe our high school principals are looking at already, but I think this really reinforces that act, and then also really gives us another opportunity to look at what's going on in 8th grade. I know Pat and I have talked a little bit about that. It's not that we didn't know that the grade point average that you have in 8th grade is going to affect, what you're doing in 9th grade, and we certainly have looked at transition activities, but I think that one of the influences of this is to look at it over a longer period of time and to do some more work with those 8th graders besides the short period of transition that we've been doing. Jay, is there anything else?
Hurry.
Pat met with the high school principals at our Systems Thinkers meeting, shared some of the preliminary data. They were very interested in having our middle school folks participate in the identification, and I think they're moving forward with that, aren't they, Pat?
Correct. I think the plan is, and maybe we could get some advice from you, is we know what these factors are, and we are getting pretty good at being able to predict the kids that are at risk. The next step is, what are the actions that you will take when you have this information? And so when we met with Jay's team, we asked them, what would you specifically do with a list of students that we think we can identify, especially these, these kids that Nick said that maybe academically were okay, but are not engaged, are not feeling connected to school, don't have a real meaning to our school. So I think that's the next stage, and I'd like to continue to team with our researchers that what would be effective? Would a mentoring program be more effective than maybe encouraging a better engagement through some type of school activity? Or how would Avid work? Or so this is such a big problem, and we're lucky that we have a relationship with some real good researchers that can help us frame this information, but ultimately we need to have changes in our behavior in our school to improve our dropout and high school graduation rates.
Anything else, Scott?
So are we going to have something in place we're at the end of this academic year, something in place?
Yes.
I mean, we hear engagement, so we'll see
Yes.
a formal plan of what we will do.
I think if some of our mid-year reviews with our high school, they have really stepped up their efforts with ninth graders. So we're well prepared to go to this next step, I would think. And that, yes, I think it makes total sense for us to have those high school principals come in and share with you the plans. And the other thing I think that we can't ignore is we really need to have an opportunity to have the conversations between 8th and 9th grade teachers, and to do some more extensive transition, not just be with students, but with the 8th grade and 9th grade teachers, because that can really help some of that transition with exactly what does the student need, what kind of things do they like, what kind of support do they have. And so if we can get some more opportunities for those 9th grade teachers to sit on school time, in job embedded time, to sit with the teachers that the students are coming up from, I think that'll make a big difference.
Can I comment on that? I totally agree with that. In fact, I was having a conversation with principal at First Creek today about a couple of kids that I had, and there was a disconnect there, and he wondered what occurred when so-and-so was in elementary. Did you see that? It was a child that I had since kindergarten, and yes, that kind of stuff did happen. And I think that may be a bigger key to helping solve that, is to have that interaction between those teachers, because there is a big disconnect between the teachers at the middle schools and the high schools, and at the elementaries and the middle schools. In terms, they're done with us. We're 5th grade. We hope you succeed, have a good year, and that if those conversations can begin, say mid-year or even before, identifying these kids and looking and seeing this is what these kids need. I second that, and the sooner that we can do that, I think the better, because we've basically siloed the kids. When they go from elementary, they're done, then they go to middle school, then they go to high school, and there's very little interaction other than looking at their comments or their report cards or whatever that's in their cum file. So I would really hope that we could figure out how to do that, and like you said, job embedded professional development or whatever it does in terms of identifying those kids that the teachers, and Mrs. Santoro, you could identify your kids, that were at risk, and that we can do that. So I think using the data that we've got, I think this is one thing that comes out, and then having that data drive, we talk about data-driven decisions around here. I think we've got a wonderful opportunity to have some data-driven decisions that we know, this confirms what we've known for a long time. I think that those transition years, even, as you know, I came in and had to get transcripts for my kids who were still at the college level, even though they're late bloomers like your son, Charlie, yes. And I looked at that 9th grade year just out of curiosity, and even our son, Robert, that was IB, that was his lowest International Baccalaureate at Foss. That was his lowest year of his entire high school year, and he barely, in fact, first semester was under a 3 point, and he'd never had that before. And then he, blopped up. So I think that pretty much supports what we're talking about. So whatever we can come up with quick as we can to begin to implement this so that we can start to make that impact now that we know what it is and where it is, the better. And this fits with our designation as a district of innovation. This is one of the things that obviously we have an opportunity to do, is to really impact this.
Well, and since we've identified these factors, the risk factors, we don't have to wait until they're in 8th grade. I mean,
No,
we
we
can
don't.
extrapolate backwards on that and certainly plan our interventions much earlier in their careers.
You know, we can tell you, those of us that taught at elementary, we can tell you 4th, 5th grade who's going to have difficulty in 6th grade, and if you have difficulty in 6th grade, and obviously you're most likely for that to continue forward. So you're absolutely right. We do have to really begin to extrapolate that backwards.
I want to speak to the transition issue. We do have other programs. We have some researchers from School of Social Work, Kevin Haggerty and Alex Mason, have been running another research project. It's called Step Up to High School, and it's a program working with 8th graders at some of our middle schools, helping the parents and the students with certain skills necessary to be successful when they hit the ground running in 9th grade. And then the transition programs with Rakes is another program. But I think that, as their research says, it's during these transitions, those are the time of risk, and you need to prepare for those and study the features that are going to have students be successful with those transitions.
Go ahead.
So I just had a comment, and again, directed at the superintendent. So your colleague, Dr. Taylor, the Vice Provost of undergraduate at the University of Washington, was at the Youth Summit a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about naming the child. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to not just look at the data in the aggregate, but to really begin to personalize the experience we have every student every day behind us, really starting to dig into how do we personalize the experience for each and every kid. And when we have early intervention based on data, I think that's the perfect combination. So not just using the data in the aggregate to say and begin to put kids into buckets, but to look at the young person and see in them, do they have these characteristics that the data is fleshing out, and then what is the plan for that individual person, and how do we make certain that that young person's getting the intervention that they need, so we begin to build the resiliency upstream instead of waiting for them to get into that danger zone.
I think that makes total sense. That's good.
So I've heard some great stuff today, and not only here right now with you three and with Pat, but also the summer programs. And I think there is a thread that's going through both of these presentations, and is setting the high expectation and thinking of them as an individual, not just as a classroom of students. And so as we go forward on the innovation discussion, we need to take this kind of information and really look at it and really listen in a lot of different ways. So I hope you continue your partnership with the Tacoma Public Schools, and we will let you back in when needed because of the great work you do, as long as you bring some good stuff back. We are embarking on a journey in regards to the innovation discussion that we've been tasked by OSPI, and to look at policies and regulations at not only the state level but the local level, and see what kind of impact we can make in education, in public education with that. So, I mean, we could go on forever and ever on this discussion. And so I'd like to, really ask the superintendent, and with Pat, I'd like to see what are the next steps that we can bring forward on this. And rather than just say, yeah, we are having discussions with the principals, I'd love to have the principals at the table in front of us and saying exactly what's happening and how do we impact that kind of thing as we continue our discussion on innovation, the facilitator and all that. So get more depth for us as we make some, I think, exciting progress over this next year. Any closing statements you'd like to share with us?
Thank you for listening to us.
All right. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Pat, anything?
This This reminds me when I hang out with these people that I would be in college right now if the pay was a little better.
Can I come too?
So I'd like to, just real quickly, the two colleagues in the back, any comments from the two of you? Oh, I think they got a lot to say, but anything you'd like to share with us? If you could come up to a microphone, that'd be wonderful. You're being televised in front of tens of people. So,
So I taught second grade in Oakland as well, so that's another experience that I've had, and I think teachers really know, like you're saying, what goes on with students, and if we can leverage them to both communicate across teachers and feel really empowered to help their students beyond when they are in their classroom. I think that could be, like, our teachers are professionals. We can get them to do that.
great. Thank you very much. With that, well, you guys, you get to go home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the work
Thank you
that you
so
did.
much.